So in the book, what I do is I outline a number of ethnic sins that provide some shades of nuance to the discussion. So I talk about ethnic hatred. That's the thing that people think about, kind of far extreme KKK kind of thing. Ethnic pride. Right? So it's more subtle. Ethnic oppression, ethnic idolatry. So, and there are a number of others.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
So welcome everyone to the Jesus in the Upper Left podcast. My name is Pete Armstrong. I'm the pastor at Park Lane Christian Reformed Church. And I'm here with my friend Oshawa Hawthorne from Brilliance Labs. And today we have Shai Linne with us. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Appreciate
welcome. So why don't you share a little bit about yourself, just for people that aren't familiar with you and your work?
Now, how deep do you want me to go?
Let's take the rest of the podcast.
So I'm born and raised in Philly. Did not grow up in a Christian home. My mom is a believer, and around the time I was in high school, she she grew up in the church, kind of walked away from it around the time I was born. But when I was in high school, she began to talk to me about the Lord. And at that point, I wanted nothing to do with anything having to do with Christianity. I grew up steeped in hip hop culture in Philly. And the kind of hip hop that I listened to was very much anti-Christian. The short version of that is I was converted as an adult. And immediately being in Philly, I was thrust into this kind of thriving Christian hip hop community that was happening in the early 2000s. And so I got kind of plugged in there, and around, I guess, 2005, released my first album, Christian hip hop. It's called the Solus Christus Project. And then from there, just the Lord opened the door for many opportunities to proclaim Christ through music. And then eventually I was sensing the call towards pastoral ministry. And so I did an internship at Capitol Hill Baptist in DC. Yeah. And I came on staff with a sister church of Capitol Hill, and then with the goal of sending me back to Philly to plant. So we planted a church in 2015, Risen Christ Fellowship. And then about 2 years ago, picked up my family, and we moved from Philly to the great Pacific Northwest, to Portland. So we've been here for about a year now.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, how did you end up here? Like, why'd you pick Portland?
Right.
And what drew you out here? And what have you observed about? Because this is the Jesus in the Upper Left podcast, so a lot of people listen in Oregon, Washington, you know. About this context.
Yeah. So I had connected with Humble Beast, who's based here in Portland, many years ago. So I've known Thomas Terry, the founder of Humble Beast, for almost 20 years now. So we've toured together with a Beautiful Eulogy and myself, and so we've had a great friendship over the years. And about 2 years ago, he asked me to consider what I consider partnering with Humble Beast, specifically for my wife Blair and I to do things as a couple. So my wife, she's a spoken word artist and an author, so she has her own ministry. That's kind of how we met. Yeah. So we were both kind of doing our thing individually, and we got invited to the same event in Long Beach, California, and eventually struck up a friendship and ended up together. But one of the things that we wanted to do was more things as a couple in this next season of life. And so Humble Beast was willing to help facilitate that for us. But there needed to be some proximity so we could, try to get more things done. And so about a year ago, we moved out here. And did you ask my impressions of the Pacific? What's your question?
Observations of this city. Church and culture. Yeah, good. Yeah. Well, let's talk.
So there's I guess there's a number of ways we could kind of look at that. So it's an interesting place. I've been surprised by how poorly run it seems to be.
Yeah.
And I don't want to like throw shade on the city, but it just seems that the governmental services are lacking. So coming from the East Coast and just thinking, 2020 happened, and I saw what was happening over here, and so I knew there was a lot going on. And when I talk to people, they say it's a lot different since the pandemic. But I'll give you a couple examples. So we got here in February of last year, and I think for the first 3 months, I did not see one police officer.
Yeah. Isn't that weird?
I was like, yo, are there no cops out here?
I moved here from the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where you literally would see like dozens of cops every day.
Right.
And I know.
Right.
It's crazy.
And so were the police actually defunded? I know it's like a phrase. Did that actually happen? Because it feels like it. It feels like it. And then, I think the homelessness issue has been different than what I've noticed back on the East Coast. So on the East Coast, homelessness was looked at as a temporary state to hopefully get out of. But it seems like here it's more of a kind of a culture,
a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Like this is what we do. And it's been interesting, even having RVs and mysterious vans parked outside of our car, outside of our house. Mm-hmm. We came back from vacation last year, and we had a new neighbor in a tent in front of our home, and so that's just been an interesting kind of cultural thing. Just trying to navigate that. And, So those are a few things. But, yeah. And I don't want to harp on the negative. The food is great. Great food. Great food. Yeah.
How about what do you see in the churches? Have you had a chance to minister in different congregations or be able to connect with other church leaders? What do you see both either God doing here, or where you just see what do you observe in the church?
So I think the church has been the most encouraging aspect of being here for us. By far. One thing that I love about the church out here is because of where we are, there's very little nominalism.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, it's not like the Deep South, right, where it can be culturally advantageous to say you're a Christian. Mm-hmm. But here it's there's no cultural advantages to aligning yourself with Christ. Yep. Yeah. And so what that's produced is more cooperation between churches that I've ever seen, in any other place where I've lived. Nice. And so it's just so common for believers from different congregations to partner in different ways. And we've been able to do that with the Ethnic Unity in the Church conference. It was great just to see so many different believers from different churches coming together. And so that's been really, really encouraging. Mm. Yeah, that's one thing.
That's definitely been one of our dreams and our passions to see that, to see the collaboration. Mm.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Ethnic Unity Conference, right? Yeah. And you also recently wrote a book around that theme and topic called The New Reformation.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about the conference and even what you see God doing. So we're about 3 years in from the book, the second year of doing that conference. Mm-hmm. Are we making progress in that direction? Are we not? Right.
Well, so the purpose of the book, the subtitle is Finding Hope in the Fight for Ethnic Unity. And I'm really trying to be aligned with God's ultimate vision for the church, which is a people from every tribe, language, people, and nation. And that's what we see in Revelation 5 and 7. And so I believe that the evil one has been very busy in terms of seeking to divide the bride of Christ. And so one of my aims was to demonstrate that this idea of unity in diversity is not that's not a political agenda.
Thank you.
Right?
Yeah.
No, that's God's heart in the gospel. And so. Yeah, so the ethnic unity in the church, we've had the conference for 2 years, and it's just seeking to kind of wave that banner of how can we as followers of Christ be intentional about pursuing unity with other believers across ethnic lines? In terms of progress, what I've seen since the pandemic, especially, has not been particularly encouraging. So, in my view, the divide has only increased in the last 4 years, and I think you have the isolation of the pandemic, which forced a lot of people to kind of be online as their kind of primary means of interacting with people, and this disembodied interaction has produced, I think, more of a willingness to be vindictive, to be spiteful, to be hateful. This whole idea of a troll has only, we're having less and less actual interaction with people, which has increased the volatility and the vitriol of interacting on this topic, and then you have the political aspect of things, where I believe that political idolatry is a big issue, and I believe that there are more people increasingly who are looking at things more through a political lens than a biblical lens. And so as that happens, what we begin to see is the church more reflecting the political partisanship of our secular neighbors than the unity and the striving for unity that we're called to as the body. So I think it's increased. Unfortunately.
Yeah. I want to ask you like what's giving you hope, but I do want to just pick your brain a little bit on, because that's something that I've really struggled with over the years of, if you share about the biblical vision for racial justice, for unity within diversity, people say now the preacher's getting political. Leave your politics out of the pulpit, blah blah blah. So how can we address that?
Right.
Is it taking people to the scriptures, or
Well, it's certainly that. I think that critique, you're being too political, only comes up so we're very selective in what we choose to say is too political or not, because when it comes to the political issues that we care about, that we want those things to be discussed. But if we're not as concerned about, you're being too political. You know what I mean? So I think as ministers, as pastors, as shepherds, it's important to communicate the full counsel of God. And I believe that as you work through the scriptures, all of these things come up in different places. It's just a matter of, are we willing to, in our applications, apply it to our present cultural moment? You know what I'm saying? And I think sometimes I think we can need help as we seek to do that, because we all have our blind spots, right? We all have our perspectives that we grew up with, and so this is a big argument for diversity. Because as you have people from different backgrounds in your congregations, there's things that as you go through particular passages that are going to come up for some people that don't come up for others, and immediately in their minds. And so that I think one helpful thing that pastors can do is be intentional about speaking with the minorities within their midst, and seek to ask them like how is life within this congregation? Is the preaching speaking to you? Anything that I'm not saying that you think would be helpful, like those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Something that I really appreciated in your book is framing the conversation more biblically around ethnicity and away from race and racism. You want to chat about that a little bit? Yeah.
So in terms of thinking about this conversation, it's important to frame the discussion biblically, rather than just merely adopting the language and the philosophy of the world regarding this. So when we think about race, like race as is commonly understood, it's a social construct. It's not. that's not a biblical category. Biblically, the proper categorization would be ethnicity, which is a Greek term ethnos, right? And so if we're going to speak about it, I think it's helpful to frame it in that way. Listen, we're human beings of different ethnicities. There's biologically very little difference, right? From person to person. But ethnically, that deals primarily with culture. It deals with history, language, those kinds of things. And so, as we discuss it, I was trying to be very intentional in the book to refer to ethnicity, and what that does is it really opens up, like, as we look in the scriptures, we begin to see it actually pop up everywhere. So anywhere you see the word that's translated Gentiles in the New Testament, underneath that is ethnos or ethne. And so even things like the Jew-Gentile conflict, right, in the New Testament, which is arguably like the biggest issue facing the church in the New Testament.
Council, Acts 15.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Paul in Galatians. And so I believe that God has given us these things in the scriptures so that we would have tools to be able to work through these things as they come up in different time periods.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what about the ethnic sin side, or as opposed to racism?
Right.
I think that's really helpful too.
Yeah. So one of the things I point out in the book is that the problem with racism is that it's this kind of umbrella term that like you can communicate too little or too much with the term. So if there's when people say racism, they could mean anything from neo-Nazi KKK to a prejudice and having a negative view, let's just say, of a particular group of people that goes unspoken. And so it's like if I say you're guilty of racism, like where are you on that spectrum, right? Because most people, when they hear racist, they think KKK, neo-Nazi, and it's offensive. Like you equating me with people who are willing to murder people because of their ethnicity. And so in the book, what I do is I outline a number of ethnic sins that provide some shades of nuance to the discussion. So I talk about ethnic hatred, and I give biblical and modern examples for each. So ethnic hatred, that's the thing that people think about, kind of far extreme KKK kind of thing. But another would be ethnic pride, right? So it's more subtle. It's just kind of an unspoken kind of, kind of superiority kind of thing. Ethnic oppression, which is kind of a bigger, broader category. So if you think about something like the displacement of Native Americans within this country and how that played itself out, that's a ethnic oppression. Ethnic idolatry. So when we exalt our ethnicity, even beyond our identity in Christ, and there are a number of others, but what I'm seeking to do is kind of frame it biblically so that when these ethnic sins pop up, we can actually identify it with biblical language.
Yeah.
Super helpful.
I'm reading The Four Loves with a guy in the church, and there's a scene where C.S. Lewis is telling the story about, I was talking with an old priest, and I said every country thinks its women are the best looking, and then the priest says, yeah, but in England it's true. And he says, I think he even calls him an ass, in the book. But so that's an example of ethnic pride.
That's right. That's right. That's excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. I might categorize that as a healthy kind of ethnic pride.
I don't know.
I love it.
Can I ask another question about politics? Like we have last month we had Russell Moore from Christianity Today come here and got to have dinner with him in the small group, and he's quite nervous. I mean, he's not a fearful guy and he's not scared, but he's quite nervous about November and kind of moving forward and its work. Like, are you nervous about the election, or nervous about kind of what that could do to the body of Christ?
He's leaving Portland before.
Well, I have my own perspective on Portland, like how we deal with it. But I'd like to hear yours.
Yeah. So, I spoke about the fruits of the isolation of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think we've seen is a spike in violence. So not only like verbal violence, but like you look at something like January 6th, like actual violence.
Yeah.
And I think one of the scariest things about January 6th to me was how many crosses and Bibles and signs that said Jesus. Like, so from a watching world, it looks like, oh, this is a Christian thing that's happening, which is that's crazy. That's absolutely insane. But it's this weird kind of syncretism, right? Where you're using the language of Christianity and you're like basically using it to justify political violence. And so I think that propensity towards responding violently, and then even in this like most recent Christian nationalism discussion, there's very aggressive kind of take things back, like kind of language that I think can open the door for violent responses if what we desire to happen politically doesn't happen. Yeah. So yes, to answer your question.
And I think, I mean, just it's not a counterpoint, but an agreement that happens on both sides. So I just saw reports today where in Europe, was it Germany, where the Conservative Party won. And that same day, there's riots in the streets from the far left, burning things down and destroying things because, hey, the conservatives took over.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not trying to communicate that it's just a right issue. I think one thing that distinguishes the right, though, is the conflation with Christianity.
Yeah.
That's the only.
Alberta's new book, The Kingdom, the Glory, that addresses that really well.
Yeah, because the far left is so like bugged out that it's just like, okay, this is crazy. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But I think it absolutely applies on both sides. And one of the things that I'm seeing is that far left extremists and far right extremists are two sides of the same coin.
They end up in the same place.
Yeah, they're very, very, very similar in their tactics and responses.
Yeah.
Brothers, may it not be so among us. Okay, let's chat a little bit about your new podcast. Right? So, Halftime.
Yeah.
I listened to the first episode. Okay. I think, did the second one drop already?
Second one dropped already.
Okay, so talk to us a little bit about that.
Tell us about the title. Is that like a music or like a football?
Right. Yes, it's neither.
Okay.
So, Halftime is... So in Psalm 90, verse 10, it says that the years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength, 80. Yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone and we fly away. And a few years ago, I was on a walk and just meditating on Psalm 90. And it just hit me that if you're over 35, like it's halftime, right? Yeah. Now it's Proverbs, so it's wisdom literature, so you don't make hard and fast doctrines. But the like generally speaking, we have about 70 or 80 years. And so then just the question became, what does it look like to make halftime adjustments? So I'm a big sports fan. I'm a Philly sports fan, and one of my biggest issues with coaches in general is failing to make halftime adjustments, right? Like it didn't work in the first half. Like, so why are you trying it again in the second half? And so that's where the idea came from. It's older men who are in their 40s and 50s, even just speaking into life and culture from that perspective.
Yeah. Who are you doing the podcast with?
So the podcast is with a good friend of mine, Ben Otero, who's he's an elder at a PCA church in Richmond. I've known him for over 20 years. And then my friend, William Deuce Branch, who's a fellow Christian hip hop artist. And I've known him for over 20 years as well. And so we have decades of friendship
Yeah.
that we're bringing to the conversation. And so, yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, highly recommended. I'm
Thank
going
you,
to keep
brother.
listening.
Well, thank you, Brilliance Labs, for your investment in the podcast. And we've gotten a really encouraging response so far.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait to check that out. I feel like I'm 44. It's right in like kind of and just thinking about everything going on with this stage of life and everything.
Yeah.
So we kind of have a question that Oshua came up with.
Okay.
That I think is great.
Oh, wow, you gonna blame Oshua
about
already?
this.
Okay.
No, it's
All right, I'm nervous now.
I loved it. No, so the three of us, we are all in our 40s, if I'm not wrong, and we've all been in ministry around 20 years. And by God's grace, we'll have at least another 20 years to kind of do this. So if you have Oshua has teenagers. I got a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and we're looking at all these sorts of things. We're into our life, marriages, family, all that kind of stuff. But so what do you see as the particular temptations of midlife?
Just generally?
Yeah. For Christian, just to like speak to Christian men that are watching this.
Yeah. So, when I got saved, I was in my mid-20s, and it's been 25 years now. And I think as a younger guy, I think the temptation can be towards pride, and all of us there's different manifestations of it, depending on stage of life. But I think there can be a zeal that comes with being a new convert, but it's a zeal that's not according to knowledge. And that can cause, what the Puritans called a censorious spirit, where overly critical. There can be a temptation to doubt the Christianity of another person because they don't have the same kind of zeal that we had, their sincerity. Like, oh, y'all just lukewarm. You know what I'm saying?
Oh my gosh,
this kind of thing. You used to talk about being on fire for Jesus, right? And that's kind of like characteristic of those who are kind of new to the faith.
You were on fire and you burned yourself out.
That's right, and burned everybody else too, right? Like it was like a forest fire on that mud, And so, so that can be temptations when we're younger. I think when we get old, as we get older, there can be the temptation to complacency. We get settled, especially if we get married and have children, and we get kind of settled into our routines and life and everything that's happening that. We can neglect the command from Romans 12, like be fervent in zeal, never lacking your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. It can become mundane. It can become routine. And so that's something that we have to proactively fight against. And then even just kind of the mindset, and I think this goes with complacency of, man, we're getting older, like retirement. I think like retirement is closer now than it was before. And it's like, okay, how are we going to prepare for that? Like kind of all of the practical things of life that are really important, but those are the very things like the cares of this world that Jesus talked about in the parable of the sower that can kind of choke things out. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's something that we have to be mindful of.
Yeah, man. So. Just another book that comes to mind that talks about this is one of John Owen's essays on sin. I think it's on sin and temptation. He has a whole section on the particular temptations in different stages in life, and some of that. I mean, I think like there's that. People talk about midlife crisis, right? That comes up for men where you're thinking through, like you look back at what you accomplished, you're like, man, has this been a failure? Like, what am I doing with myself? Yeah. And either you like rededicate yourself. And I there was a message from John Piper at in one day 2000, like boast only in the cross. It was really formative in my faith, and I think it was the case for many like millennial kind of on fire believers back in the early 2000s. But he kind of does that. He's talking to 40,000 college students. He's like, I I'm rededicating myself to my last season in ministry.
Yeah.
Like what does that look like for you or those other brothers on the podcast to look back and be like, okay, how do I see and seek to have my second half be even more fruitful than my first?
Yeah, I think that as I get closer to meeting the Lord, and even as my kids get older, the idea of legacy, godly legacy, becomes more and more crystallized in my mind. And so, it's no longer, our strength is waning, right? The older we get. And so but Lord willing, we're growing in wisdom, right? And so what we lack in physical strength and vitality, Lord willing, is something that we're like we're growing in wisdom in order to be able to pass that down to the next generation. And so for me, that's been more of a focus. How can what I'm doing and even in my wife and I doing more things together as a couple, that's all surrounding the family. It's godly families, leaving a godly legacy, providing tools and resources for to enrich and encourage families, so that as you were just talking about your dad and being able to have something that our grandkids can benefit from, you know what I mean? And not just our own grandkids, but even, Lord willing, should he breathe on it, even more broadly speaking. So as I think about this next and possibly final season of life, I'm even more invested into the family and how the gospel informs these things. Christ crucified, risen, and exalted is more precious to me now than it's ever been. I think the older we get, the longer our track record with the Lord, the more we see his faithfulness, and the more we see our own need for Jesus. That doesn't decrease, that increases the longer we walk with him. And so I want to be I've sought to be as clear as possible. Gospel clarity has been an intentional focus in the first half. I don't intend for that to change at all, but only I want that to be even increased.
Yeah.
What are you learning, Pete, as you're reading your dad, who is a pastor, right? And you're reading his journals as he's approaching end of life?
Yeah. I mean, so much of what you alluded to, just that steady faithfulness. We were talking about Eugene Peterson, along obedience in the same direction, and also the humanity of people. I think I did struggle a lot in my teens and 20s, being a pastor's kid. Our kids are like ministry kids, And one of the big struggles of that, it's almost a cliche, but like being under the spotlight, just feeling like people are watching, people are observing me. You got to be a leader. Right. You got to be because you got Shai as your dad. And sort of working my way through that. But then looking, learning so much about my dad when he was my age and being like the challenges were there. The insecurities were there, the struggles interpersonally, getting along with people in the church, getting along, like learning to love them. It's messy, and it's so real. And no marriage is perfect. No, just I love seeing. I did a memorial service for a couple on Saturday, and she went to be with the Lord during COVID, and then he went to be with the Lord last month. So we did it together.
Oh, wow.
And they had been married 64 years. And I mean, the blessing of that family was incredible. And, you don't know everything, but working with the kids to plan the funeral, it was just so godly, Christ-centered. I asked the daughter to pray with me a couple hours before the service because it had been a heavy week for me emotionally, being with my dad and everything. And she just laid hands on me and prayed for me this beautiful, and I'm like, that's a legacy of your mom, your dad. And then to hear one of their grandkids who's been to seminary, like share the gospel in the service. And that's exactly what you're talking about, that legacy.
Yeah. When I proposed to my wife, Blair, we were at the Lincoln Memorial in DC. So it was a few feet away from where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech.
Yeah.
And the one thing that was just really clearly impressed on my heart and Blair's is the impact that just one godly couple can have on generations to come. You know what I'm saying? Like obviously we see it in the Bible with Abraham and Sarah, right? On a grand level, but yeah, we both come from broken families, not many Christians, not many marriages, and so really, like, this is like our marriage is the first like two Christians together married, like for a length of time in our entire families and generations, right? And so seeking to raise our kids in the fear and we want to, and we're already starting to see the fruit of that. And yeah, so it's an exciting thing to think about. Like, man, what is our faithfulness by the grace of God? Like, what impact will that have 3-4 generations from now?
Yeah, that's gospel motivation right there to think about the big picture.
Well, let's end on some practical takeaways, and particularly around finishing well. So one thing, as I'm in this stage of kind of halftime, I've been able to look back and like old Bible college buddies and friends that have either been in ministry or they're married and they're following the Lord. And you look back and you're like, there's a lot of wrecks on the side of the road that we're 20 years in to seeking to follow Jesus, seeking to be faithful to our wives, seeking to raise our kids well, seeking to stay in ministry, right? And I look back and not as many brothers are with me as started the race.
Right.
Now it's all by God's grace, right? That each of us have been able to persevere in faith and in ministry and marriage. But like as we look back on some of the shipwrecks that maybe hit really close to home for us, like how are you cultivating joy with the Lord? How you protecting yourself from the deconstruction, right? That is happening in our culture. How do you cultivate joy in your marriage? How do you see that your kids are being raised in the faith? And obviously it's a huge category, but just a couple takeaways. You're like, dude, this is my lifeline. If I didn't have this in my life, dude, I'd be shot.
Right. Yeah. So as you were talking, it just reminded me of the Lord's exhortation to the church in Ephesus in Revelation 2. He says, I know you are enduring patiently and bearing up for my name's sake, and you have not grown weary. But I have this against you, that you have abandoned the love you had at first. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen, repent, and do the works you did at first. Do the works you did at first. You know, as believers, we in one sense, we never outgrow those original things that we learned, the means of grace, the spiritual disciplines, right? The being in God's word, seeking him in private prayer, memorizing scripture, like those things that we, like when we got discipled, those were things that we learned. Again, over time, the cares of life, even the cares of ministry can take us away from that. Like there's no replacement for time spent with Jesus, particularly private time, right? Time in secret, like your Father who sees in secret will reward you. There's no replacement for it. No amount of spiritual giftedness, no amount of ability to speak in front of people, like that. You can't replace that. There's a there's a quote from J.C. Ryle, who has a wonderful little booklet on prayer. It's called A Call to Prayer. Highly recommend. It's the best thing I've ever read on prayer.
Wow.
But one of the things that he says is, he says, you can be sure that men fall in private long before they fall in public. And he's talking about specifically that prayer, that life of secret prayer. Jonathan Edwards said, he said the hypocrite is woefully deficient in the art of secret prayer. And so, as ministers, we can, because we're so busy, there's so much going on, the temptation can be for us to live our lives more in front of others than before the face of God.
Yeah.
And so long answer to your question. I'm basically saying, in order to continue, we need to do the works we did at first. Look, man, I just saw yesterday a minister, highly respected minister in his 70s, fall. Decades of faithful ministry, and he's towards the end now.
I think you're too old and boring to sin by then, man.
You would think, but it
was something that happened earlier that must have been heavy on his conscience.
Yeah, so I think it's just a reminder of, like, for all of us, that we need the Lord. We need the Lord, and so
What do you got, Pete? Do you got what's your lifeline?
What's my life? I mean, I'm hearing him say salvation is of the Lord, and that's like, can't add anything to that. So
yeah. I think the only thing I would add, and we're wanting to actually do a whole series on ministry families and spiritual emotional health within ministry families, and just how important that marriage is, that marriage bed, and taking the time. Like, I think it's like for guys in upfront ministry where if things are stressful at home and harder, like you're not getting wins at home, then you seek all your wins and your accolades out in public and in ministry, and then you drift in your heart from your wife and your kids, and like, dude, like for me, finding just joy, like getting home and being like, it's the weekend. I get to play Legos with my kids. I get to go on a walk with my wife. Like, we get to sleep in and cook waffles. Like, that's the best part of my week. I'm not lying. Like, that is the best part. Like, that's
waffles, strawberries, whipped cream this morning.
Let's go.
Hey, it was a good day. It's a good day.
Yeah. And I think what I would add to that, brother, is we need help. Like, all of us need help. And I've seen with a lot of brothers, we can live in isolation, right? Isolation with our families, right? So we think I have my wife, I have my kids, so we're a community. But it's like, nah, actually, if we don't have, as a couple, me and my wife, we need other couples that we can talk to, be open with, transparent with, and who can speak into our marriage. A lot of the guys that I've seen who have ended up divorced, all kinds of train wrecks, shipwrecks. One of the things, common denominators, has been, there was an isolation. So you and your wife, you guys were isolated. There was no one who was able to speak into your marriage, even. And then even the ways that we interact as men, seeking to be vulnerable with each other, asking hard questions like, how is your marriage, right? So we can spend so much time, when we get together, it's usually activity based. We're doing stuff, but having real, like, heart conversations, and that gets into male friendships, which is another aspect of things. But my wife and I, the person that did our premarital counseling, the pastor who did our premarital counseling, he graciously offered to, like, basically said, if you guys ever have a bump in your marriage, like, hit me up and we can have a Zoom call. And so, like, that has been so life-giving for my wife and I. When, like, we get to a point where we're just like, we're kind of at each other and it's just like, okay, like we need to call him up,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We need to have the Zoom call. You know what I'm saying? Because we just need to be able to have others who can speak in. So yeah,
Amen, dude. Wise words. This is good. Good stuff.
yeah.
Okay, so how can people find you and your work? What is there any other things that you want to share?
Yeah, so you can. So I'm social media wise. I'm on Instagram. So / Shai Linne, and then or / whichever / and then ShaiLinnemusic.com is my website. And then humblebeast.com. You can get updates on what we're doing.
Yep. And then the halftime, right?
Halftime. Yeah. The Halftime podcast with Shai Linne, and that's on all platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet, brother.
Yeah.
This has been good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Shai,
Thank y'all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, bro. Yeah. It's been good. It's been good.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.